Hello readers, I'm the avid reader and today we're talking about 5 key ideas I've learned from Thomas Sowell Books. So far I've read 7 of his books, and the thing with Thomas Sowell is that he's cross-discipline, so he's written economics, sociology, and history. And you learn things from Thomas Sowell Books that mainstream books never bring up or never point out. So if you read a couple Thomas Sowell books, whenever you read another book, you're gonna immediately see, that doesn't make sense, that's a fallacy. One Thomas Sowell economics book and you will see that most history books have plenty of fallacies within them. So I'm gonna take one key ideas from 5 different books. So my first Thomas Sowell book was Basic Economics, and the key theme of Basic Economics is scarcity. So there are resources that have alternative uses. So whenever you regulate something to get more of it, necessarily you're going to get less of it elsewhere. And if you fix a price below the market rate, then resources that would have been used for that are going to go to alternative uses. So for example, when you fix cheap housing prices, then builders are going to go and build luxury houses. More resources are going to be shifted from poor housing to rich housing. So that's the irony with a lot of these regulations. A lot of these regulations that are here to help poor people or working class people, or they actually don't benefit anyone really, but relatively they benefit middle class or rich people more than working class or poor people. So whenever you have a regulation or a tax, you need to understand that's never really going to increase the supply probably. It will shift it to something else. You have this welfare state here in Europe and the government spends a lot on healthcare and education and things like that. But that's why you have to tax a lot, and that's why when you go and buy a car it's so expensive. Goods are scarce and they have alternative uses. The second idea I'm going to talk about is from Economic Facts and Fallacies. And the general theme in this book is about the misleading inequality statistics. So the thing with inequality statistics in the USA is that they're measuring categories. They're not actually measuring people. So when they say, oh, the gap between the bottom 20% and top 20% has widened, the thing is actually that it's not the same people in the bottom 20% now as 5 years later. And most people in the bottom 20% are going to be in the top 50% in a few years. And even a lot of them are going to be in the top 20%. And people keep talking about the top 1%, but barely anybody stays in the top 1% for a long time. So talking about this separate class of people, the top 1%, and this really poor bottom 20% doesn't make any sense. It's just people at different stages in their life. A lot of those bottom 20% people are students, and a lot of those top 20% people are quite old people. So throughout your life, you may be in the bottom 20% as a student in your 20s, and then once you enter your 50s, you may have entered the top 20%. So there is a lot of social mobility, but simple inequality statistics do not measure that. If you measure people instead of categories, you will see that there is social mobility. And then there's the thing that we measure these categories by households. And households aren't people. So there are a lot more people in the top 20% households than in the bottom 20% households. So you're not even measuring the same quantity of people. So of course, the top 20% are gonna have more money. And then there's the thing, oh, there's been economic stagnation. Household incomes have barely risen. That's because 50 years ago, a lot more people lived in one household than now. Let's say hypothetically 50 years ago, you had a household of 5 people making $40,000 a year, and now you shift to a household that is making $42,000 a year, but there are 2 people living in that household. Per capita income has risen. So you need to measure per capita income statistics and not household statistics to understand if people have become better off. Next key idea is from Black Rednecks and White Liberals, and this kind of talks about the origins of anti-Semitism and xenophobia. There's also the concept here of middlemen minorities. So to have an economy working, you need these middlemen who have knowledge that other people don't, which makes it easier for you to get products. So middlemen include, for example, the retailers. Retailers buy from the producer and then sell it to you. And it would be inefficient for you to go and buy it off the producer yourself. And then they make some money on that windfall. And that's not a bad thing. They're making money by making the economy more efficient. And people who work in things like this tend to be minorities like Jews in the USA, or the Chinese in East Asia, or a couple hundred years ago, Armenians in Turkey. But the thing is, people are envious. People don't like to see, oh, there are people who are more successful. When people are envious of Jews' wealth, they may become anti-Semitic also, because they think, oh, they're cheating the system to become wealthy. Same thing with the Malays in Malaysia. They may see the Chinese are making more money and dominating the industries. They may make xenophobic laws against them. So fundamentally, there's not that big of a difference between anti-Semitism and hatred of the rich. It's envy of people for the same reason, that they're more successful than you. The next idea comes from a conflict of visions, and this book talks about the two prevailing visions, so it's a new paradigm to think of politics and economics. So you have the constrained vision, which is usually how conservatives view the world, and they believe that there are limited resources and that there aren't solutions, there are trade-offs. So when you do one thing, there's going to be a consequence in another way. So let's say if you spend on healthcare, then there's going to be less money for transport available. And the constrained vision, because they believe that humans are flawed and that they're not perfectible, they believe that social processes are the most important things. So that's why it's really important to have a separations of power like in the United States, where you have Congress, the President, the Supreme Court. And when they talk about equality, they believe in equality before the law, because they believe that it's impossible to believe that everyone is created equal. And the implications of this is that you have a limited government usually. On the other hand, you have the unconstrained vision. They believe, yes, humans are perfectly rational. We can organize society in whatever perfect way we need to. And whenever the unconstrained vision sees a problem, they think that someone is to blame for it. Constrained vision, they think, oh, it may be a fact of nature. Unconstrained vision always thinks there's an individual who's causing this problem, even though problems naturally exist. So that's why the unconstrained vision favors more government control. When they see a supposed wrong, they want to right it through force. And when they see disparities between people, disparities that the constrained vision would think is unfortunately natural, the unconstrained vision is going to want to impose social justice to ensure that there's equality of numbers among different races or genders, even though that's not what people themselves want. Then the fifth and final key idea that I'm going to talk about comes from ethnic America. A lot of the stories of different immigrants to the United States is about how poor immigrants came to the USA and then became wealthy through hard work and through skilled work. So for example, you have the Chinese in the West Coast who established the laundromat industry. You have the Jews on the East Coast who are involved in the garment industry. And the point with these groups is that they succeeded despite facing discrimination. So a lot of people talk about today, oh, these people are not succeeded because they have been mistreated. This is why this minority is not succeeding as much as the general public. But the thing is, there have been badly discriminated minorities who have still succeeded, because the key to success is human capital, not government favoritism. And groups that have gotten into power to implement favoritism, like the Irish in the East Coast or blacks in the cities in the United States, they have not succeeded better because of it. Often, minority-led leaders are counterproductive in forwarding the interest of their own group. The Jews and the Chinese in the United States, they didn't focus on electing people to represent them. They just focused on acquiring skills that people wanted. Since even someone who hates a specific group, if that group is much better than everyone else at doing something, then that person is going to grudgingly hire them. So the key of improvement for an ethnic group is skills, human capital, not government representation. So those are some important key ideas I've learned from reading Thomas Sowell. He's my favorite non-fiction author. Most of the book I've read by him, all that I've mentioned here, are great. There are a couple of not as great books, but are still good. And if you want to understand economics more and how politicians say things that don't make any sense, then you should read Thomas Sowell. And important books by Thomas Sowell that are worth reading are Basic Economics, Economic Facts and Fallacies, Black Rednecks and White Liberals, A Conflict of Vision, and Ethnic America. Those are all 5 great starts to reading Thomas Sowell, I'd say. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this a little different video where I break down ideas from books that I've read. When I read more Thomas Sowell books, I may make another key ideas video about his books. Anyways, I'm the avid reader, and I will see you readers next time.